Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So last time what we tried to understand is what is the total procedure of allocation of function. We remember that in allocation of function the initial stage is hierarchical task analysis. Now today what we will do, we will try to understand through an example how these steps can be followed and how we can actually practice. So for today's example I have taken anyway it's taken from one already established example. In a brewery shop, how the beers are being produced, manufactured depending on the market. So when there is an extra demand in the market, especially in different seasons like New Year or any celebration period, so how the demands increases, how the varieties can be increased or can be modified, and how we can connect that to the different pubs or the delivery processes, okay, like different shops, different pubs or the outlets from where the beers can be sell out. Okay, now here why this particular context? Because this context is very much dependent on the customer's need. Okay, now this need is not equal throughout the year, okay, it keeps on varying. So depending on the demand, depending on the market requirement, what we need to do is we need to plan our manpower, plan our production line, plan our delivery system, plan our warehouse or storage capacity and everything, right? So this is very much connected to any live example that we can practice or that we come across in our research area. So let us understand the whole process. Mainly we will have, as we mentioned in the procedure, 4 steps, major steps. First is forecasting the demand, then produce the provisional resource plan, check the feasibility of that particular plan. See, we may forecast many things, however we really need to check what is the kind of feasibility we have in the possibilities to execute that plan, and then review the potential impact. Okay, so let us start with one by one. So when we are talking about now once we do all these things, then in allocation of function, the major concept of allocation of function is we will be allocating all these steps either to human or to computer, means machine, or both, where somewhere human is more in control, or in some cases computer or machine is in control. Okay, so first let us understand the all these steps and then we will allocate that function. So that is the major agenda for allocation of function. So when we are talking about forecast the demand, especially for this particular example, brewery context. So what we will do, we will understand the regular sales, okay, because throughout the year there is a pattern of sales. So first we need to understand what are the minimum things are possible. Okay, when seasons comes, definitely it will increase, but for basic understanding, what is the regular sale, what is the kind of selling is happening in each outlet, maybe it's retail, it may be pub, it may be some shop or something. Okay, let us first understand that. Once we understand that, we need to say that review the demand from different. Here I mentioned pub because in that particular example they deal with pub, but we can do for each separate outlet, okay, wherever the beers are being on sale. Okay, and then review the potential demand from one off time event, okay, when there is nothing, no celebration, still there are something is going on, right, in a regular basis. So first we need to understand these three separate stages of what is the kind of sale is happening during these three stages. Okay, so once we complete this particular reviewing process, what we will do how do we manage our resources, how do we manage our manpower, how do we plan our manpower, what is the kind of storage we require, what is the kind of supply we need to do. So all these provisional plan we need to work on from the resource point of view. So for that, what we have to do, two major stage. One is the calculation of the expected demand for each type of beer. So there are different categories, right? It's not only beer, maybe if you are talking about cosmetic, if you are talking about any other beverage or any other product, you have to see there are different types, right? If we are talking about face wash, what we need to do, we need to say, so for dry skin, for maybe normal skin, so there are different varieties. So for each thing we need to understand for each category what is the expected demand. So these demand calculation, so this is very quantification, right? So these things will come from my first portion, that is the forecasting the demand. So that forecast, the result of the forecasting the demand will be used to calculate the expected demand for each type, each variety. Once that is there, then we need to do the adjustment for production, what is the maximum possibility, what is the minimum possibility, because as I mentioned, these type of things are not equally demanding throughout the year, right? So if it is not equally demanding throughout year, what we have to do, we have to see when demand is in the maximum level, when demand is at the minimum level. So accordingly we have to really plan how we can see our resources to be handled. So once these two steps are complete, then we need to see that how we can feasibly, possibly we will be able to execute the plan that we are making. So to do so, we have different steps. Now here I jotted down the major 7 steps. Okay, it may happen while working on for your particular case, there will be some differences. Okay, so depending on the case to case, maybe you can do some changes, you can add or subtract some more. Okay, so how we are checking the feasibility? Do the materials explosion of ingredients are available or not? So what I did over here is the maximum possible things I included. Okay, it may happen for your case it will exactly match. However, there are chances depending on the type of context that you are using, there are changes. That's why I mentioned it. Okay, so first one, that how the materials are, material explanations of that particular ingredients are available or not. Then do materials explosion of casks and other packaging. Okay, so is there availability that is available on, because when we are talking about any kind of such production, definitely packaging is a very important issue, right? So then what is the kind of stock we have for all these materials. It's not only the particular product, but also associated accessories like packaging material, other binding material, and all those things. Then calculate the materials whole requirement. What is the kind of, so if we are talking about particular beverage, to manufacture that, to produce that, what are the raw materials available? Once raw materials are there for that particular manufacturing, then how do we store them, how do we package them, how do, so all varieties of material, whatever the materials, even the machineries parts requirements, everything we need to calculate. So suppose a particular machine will work for 8 hours in a day, and it will, particular part will sustain for 3 months. Now if I need to plan for 1 year, we have to see what is the kind of investment I need for that particular part for a year production, right? So all these things we need to understand, because anyway whenever we are talking about all this thing, money requirement or human availability, everything is important, right? So for that you need to calculate those material. Now once we understand, okay, these are the requirements, what we need to do, we need to negotiate with our suppliers. So this is very much human dependent, okay. So this we need to formulate, how do we negotiate with the suppliers, and at what time, at what rate, at what intents they will supply, and how they will transport, everything for each and every component we need to make sure that we negotiate and we get this thing done. This is very much human dependent, okay. Now next is we are planning. This is completely, so it's in the planning stage, so all the managerial level people will be involved. Fine. Once this is done, then we need, for executing this whole task, major thing is the staff, right? Who will do this? It's not only the varieties of labor, it's the whole process need to be maintained by some human being, right? So how I am engaging my whole manpower in this whole job throughout my year, this feasibility. So if I have 30% on roll, how I am going to allocate them for these jobs, okay. So here job responsibilities, okay, will be defined. So once these job so how do we recruit people? So depending on all these varieties, we need to actually do this, and all these things I'm saying that it's very much important when we are at the initial stage of development. If it is established and there is not much drastic change in the market demand, probably it will continue, the same pattern will continue for some years. Of course business is not like that, manufacturing process is not always same for years and years. There will be change in the market, there will be change in the demand, production line, everything will change, and these calculations you need to keep on doing on a regular basis. So once this is done, that availability, whatever the kind of manpower you have, you calculate that, then what you need to do, that check the ability to deliver this produced beer to the customer. So how you are going to produce them? So again you have to talk about your logistics, okay, transport system, who are the people who will be involved, how do you connect to the outlets, how do you connect to the pubs, all those things you need to calculate. So all these are 4C, okay. So you are actually calculating everything beforehand, because if you don't have a pre-assumption, maybe there will be lot of difficulties when you are actually going to execute it. Yes, of course, it's not that if you are calculating and starting with something and there will be no change. Of course based on the immediate requirement, there will be changes here and there. However, the major component will be established beforehand. Okay. Now, when everything is done, you have to understand what is the kind of potential impact they have, whatever we did, and we have to review those impact. So, major 3 review: impact on the plan on cash flow, which is actually very important for this particular case. For your case or your research, depending on the context, it may change. Plan on the staff, so when do you recruit, when what is the kind of terms and condition you are applying, what is the kind of job role you are assigning, what is the kind of job rotation you are planning, what is the break cycle you are planning for your staff, everything. So this is very crucial, because anyway we are talking about human factors, right? So, if somebody is handling a particular activity, depending on the capacity and capability of the human or the operator, you need to really understand which component of your task this person is going to execute, right? So, here the planning is very important, and reviewing that is extremely important. Okay, and this is not really very much quantitative, it depends on the tacit knowledge. Okay, so a person, why do we rely on experience? Here this experience comes and plays a major role. Okay, for both the, for all these reviewing cases, tacit knowledge is very important, because depending on the industry to industry, depending on the varieties of people they are interacting and assessing these whole activity, the nature will keep on changing. Okay, so it's purely based on your, of course there are structures, however that is not only the thing. So depending on the industry, depending on the type, the experience will be different, knowledge base will be different, and you can have different models, you can build different models for that. Of course, you need to work on the customer relation. For this particular case, the customers are the pub people, like who are actually buying your beverage. Okay, and then suppliers relation. So how all these activities, so whatever you have planned in your earlier phase, okay, all these process, okay, how these are going to impact on all these 4 component, you have to really review on it. So if there is a problem with the cash flow, it may affect your staff plan, it may affect your relation with the customer, also it may affect the relation with the supplier. Okay, so all are interdependent, and how you are actually planning to handle it, this critical part is very important, and you need to review it. It's real important aspect. Once this is particular thing is done, for this particular example, what we did, or what the author did, they analyzed the this particular analyst took into account the stakeholders need. Okay, so they tried to understand the stakeholders need to exercise the craftsmanship and other specialist skill. That's why I was saying tacit knowledge is very important, and their wish to maintain the control of planning heuristic, and their need to promote cohesive teamwork. So this particular thing you need to understand. So the analyst also may opt for a high degree of allocation to human. So depending on the type of activity you are doing, the analyst can play here. Okay, which one they more rely on the human, where they can more rely on the computer. So a greater amount of computer support would have better addressed a need for quick recalculation of plans when under stress. Okay, if something is under stress, so recalculation is very much possible if mostly things are controlled by computer, whereas it may opposite if it is controlled by the human. So, but this was in conflict with the needs most associated with the stakeholders' sources of job satisfaction, because when stakeholders have less control over the whole activity, stakeholders majorly here will be the operator. Okay, if they have less control over the job, there may create job stress or job dissatisfaction, which in turn may cause the reduction in the performance or productivity. Okay, so here the optimization, all these optimizations are very important concept. So whenever third party wants to do all those things, they need to work very closely with actual stakeholders, specifically the operators, managers, supervisors, okay, the situations. Okay, so if they have all these correct information with them, then these allocations will be very much correct. Now here, for this particular example, let us see how the analyst did the allocation. So H means human, C means computer, HC means both human and computer, whereas human has more control. CH, computer and human both have function, however computer has more control. Okay, now here you can see for all these forecast demand, it's completely based on human review. Okay, so human, the person himself or herself need to do this task. So for this we really need specialists, and they are employed for that particular job only. Now in the second case, we can do some kind of calculation through computer. Also human input is required, whereas in the adjustment cases, minimum and maximum, we can rely on the computer. Here also the feasibility plan checking, of course human is more powerful to do the change in the permutation combination, and for each cases like material explosion, human computer, where human is more, material explosion for the casks and other packaging, we need to rely on the computer because the machine is going to work on this. Material stock, material require. So material requirement, definitely we need to depend on the machine, because how much material is required for doing that particular packaging, machine only can tell us. We cannot do any kind of changes over there, whereas we can work on the stock part where human can be the major controlling power. Then suppliers, availability of the staff, and the delivery feasibility, all these three steps are majorly on the human. So if you check the whole process, you can see human is more powerful over here, right? Now in the next part where the review comes, all are human. So human has to take the major role, right? So any review, any impact analysis has to be done by the human. Okay, so this way. Now once we understand, so this whole process can be done, and then based on the result whatever is coming, you have to take the decision. So this way you can complete the allocation of function, and from this allocation of function, whatever like human computer human, whatever the allocations you are doing based on your example, you can take that for further review or further intervention. This way allocation of function, this particular method will help you to understand the situation, understand that particular context. Okay. Now let us understand the advantages of whatever we get for this particular process. So this particular process provides a structure for automation decision. So wherever computer is more powerful, we can easily go for automation, whereas human is more powerful, we really need to think where to do the automation. Okay, so based on the allocations, we need to plan how we can introduce automation in the whole process. Okay, this process actually ensures the automation decision where exactly, so decision making. Okay, so that is important, and the process of course helps to ensure the system user will not be inappropriately delegated the role of supervisors of the automation system. So very clearly they will mention where the supervision is required, how it is required, when it is required. So all these steps are very clear if we use this particular allocation of function method. So later, once it is established, once it is verified for a particular system, okay, later it will be very easy for the who is going to do the intervention to take a decision where to start. Okay, so these are the advantages. However, there are different disadvantages. Majorly, this process can be very costly in large scale system. This is a very small system that I described. However, if it is a very large system, nuclear power, or big automobile industry or manufacturing of something very big, for those cases it is very costly, because each steps you need to really look into. So initial cost of doing this particular process or assessment will be very costly, and the process requires a degree of expertise. Of course, as I mentioned, tacit knowledge is very important in the whole process. Okay, and understanding what is human factor, how do we consider human factor, that familiarity is very much important. So it's a skill. Okay, maybe if you first time you are doing this, you will not be able to decide which one human, which one computer. There may be some ambiguity, whereas if you keep on practicing with the help of some experts, you will gain the knowledge and you will understand, because you will be able to do it very perfectly. Okay, so the expertise is very important, and access to and involvement with the system stakeholder is very essential, because if you do not have access to the stakeholder, like talking to the manager, talking to the supervisor, or understanding the role of operator, if these are not accessible to you, you will not be able to do the allocation properly. Okay, so these are the disadvantage. So you need to rely on the stakeholders view. If there is an obligation, there is an obstruction to contact or connect to the stakeholders, you will not be able to map the whole process, or you will not be able to allocate the whole process correctly. Okay, so these are the advantages. And of course, connected methods are task analysis, because without task analysis you will not be able to start the whole process. Okay. The very much connected method is socio-technical system analysis. Anyway, this will not be under discussion in this particular course. And this stakeholders analysis, again this we will not be able to discuss, because these are more of managerial tool and less connected with the ergonomics. So we will not be able to discuss these two in detail. However, already we discussed this task analysis in our earlier presentations. Okay, so coming to reliability and validity, there has been considerable debate surrounding the validity of the concept that is in practice, because as this is completely very much, not completely, very much dependent on the tacit knowledge and accessibility to stakeholders. So it's actually, the validity is always on debate. Okay. So while function allocation provides a useful theory of automation decision, the approach typically prescribes that particular method or incorporate different practices in an idealized form, because we are actually idealizing. Okay, this is ideal situation, in that case this is going to happen. But if you look at industry, always it is not ideal situation, there are different changes happening in continuation. Okay, so I really do not know which manpower is available very next day, it may happen there is a drastic change. So how do we handle all those things? For those cases, this particular process may fail, and there is no real evidence that misallocation has ever contributed to a systemic failure, because we, being human, we have always a nature to handle the situation. Okay, so if I am allocating a particular function to human computer and there is a failure, we really cannot say that this failure is because of this allocation, because maybe during the failure something has been taken care by human or something has been taken care by the whole system. So we really cannot say if the allocation fails, the whole system will collapse. It's not like that, right? So this gives an indication, this help us to understand the whole situation. However, it will not really very much valid. So that's why people say we really cannot completely rely. Okay, of course it has it gives a good picture. It gives a good picture to understand your situation. However, we cannot complete. We keep on checking it. Okay, once we do the allocation of functions on a day basis, as I mentioned, in the initial stage it is very much helpful. It gives you a better understanding of your planning or your setting up the system. How do you set up the system? How do you start the automation? For those cases it is very much important. However, you cannot keep it as it is for years and years. You have to keep on performing it. Okay, so that depending on the demand, the decisions will change. So there is the reliability issue. However, we can use it for based on the research objective that you have. Okay, and of course there is no special tools that is required for allocation of system function. Okay, most important is the need to create the design documentation. So documenting each step is very important, and that can be audited to justify the particular allocation. Now this audit is very important. If you, that's why I said initial stage you do function allocation. Okay, once it is done, run it for a year or so, and once the demand, there is a change in the demand, again you have to do. So auditing it every time when you are changing and how the results are coming, depend on that your tool will be successful. Okay, so really we do not need much other tools requirement. So there is nothing, so we can do it based on our expertise. So that's all for the example of allocation of function. So next we will start critical decision method. Thank you.